Good evening, everybody. Before we start, I've got the chairman's introduction to read out. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. Okay, so first item on the agenda is appointment of substitutes. Do we have any appointments of substitutes?
Chair, yes, we do have some substitutes tonight. Councillor Aladita is here for Councillor Mark Bayliss. Councillor Bill Amos is here for Councillor Lucy Hodgson. And I know that Councillor Louise Griffiths has given her apologies. Her substitute is due to join us very shortly.
Thank you. Next item is, are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, so the next item is the section for public representations. I've got Paul Snicks, who's going to give a short 5-minute presentation. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm speaking as a representative of Worcester Environmental Group and wanted to talk tonight about an opportunity to spend money now to save money in the future. As you know, as you probably do know, we've had this pilot wildflower verge up in Dugdale Drive in Warndon Villages. I'd recommend going to have a look at it if you get a chance. That only has to be cut twice a year in the near future and once again in the spring. So that would massively reduce costs for the council. It's very popular with voters. We've had an overwhelmingly positive response to the beautiful native wildflowers that are growing there. Speaking to Mark Bayliss, the officer Mark Bayliss, and Mark Worrell, and also the Environmental Committee with Councillor Andy Stafford, there's an enthusiasm for doing more of this around the city, and I would welcome the opportunity to visit your wards and to discuss opportunities to have more birds and bees and butterflies and great for the community as well. We had a meeting on Zoom several months ago from a Dr. Phil Sterling to council officers and some councillors, where he talked about what they have done down in Dorset, where they've done this throughout the whole county with great success. And there's a table I'd just like to show you that he presented in a PDF that shows how over a 5-year period you can save a considerable amount of money, hopefully. Could we go down to the, oh, right, it hasn't come out as a table there, unfortunately. But you can see there that with only cutting twice a year, that over a period of 5-6 years, the estimate there is a saving of £12,870.59p. So I think it's a golden opportunity for councillors to look at buying machines. In order to have this regime, you need cut and collect machines. The machines come in, they cut and take away the grass cuttings. That reduces the fertility That's the niche that our wildflowers flourish in. Only twice a year, and there you would have those savings that you saw there. So if you've got those machines in the near future and started the cut and collect regime, you will be saving money, enhancing biodiversity, pleasing the voters. And so that's the end of my pitch. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'm sure that we'll be considering that during the budget setting processes later on in the year. Thank you. Right, you're free to go or stay as you wish, Paul. Right, so the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. I don't propose to go through them page by page. Is everybody content with those minutes? Thank you. Approved. Next item is the minutes of the Income Generation Subcommittee. Does anybody have any questions or concerns about that? Happy to note them. Okay, noted. Next item is the, sorry.
Thank you. I mean, just whilst reading the minutes of the Income Generation Subcommittee, I mean, I noted the fact that it's an entirely male preserve, which is not ideal for gender balance and probably not ideal for sharing of ideas and potential income generation opportunities missed. I mean, I guess within our constitution, there isn't any, perhaps I should phrase it as a question, within the constitution, is there any requirement for a degree of balance and involvement?
As far as I know, there isn't anything in our constitution that says that. I think it's down to the group leaders who populate those meetings, I'm guessing.
To have a more gender balanced representation. I don't think there'd be an opposition from anyone on this side. No, only from one of your team, I'm afraid, Adrian. Yeah. Because that would be against our constitution, because it wouldn't be balanced, would it?
No. Liam, you'd like to come back?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is that at the time that group leaders put people forward, you don't know whom else is being put forward. Hence, you can end up with this scenario. So, we're noting the minutes. I hope that will be noted as well, and perhaps all group leaders could reflect on the fact.
Okay. Moving on to the next set of minutes, which is the Personnel and General Purposes Subcommittee. Are we happy to note those minutes? Okay, thank you. So on to the next item, which is agenda item 7, which is a referral report from Communities Committee, request capital funding for housing. Who's going to take this? Is this shameful?
You sure? Thank you. Thank you, Chair. This is, as has been noted, as a referral report. The matter has already been considered at Communities Committee, and the issue with regard to the Policy and Resources Committee is in respect of the funding that's available. Members will be aware that in 2018, £500,000 was set aside to support vulnerable housing acquisitions and develop policies around that. And this proposal is to acquire 8 one-bedroom self-contained flats. The council will be contributing £15,000 per unit, a total of £120,000, and will in return receive 100% nomination rights for the properties. So the Communities Committee has considered it. There is an additional £20,000 for fit out, but that is within the financial remit of the committee, so that's already approved. So this is just for the Policy and Resources to agree that the £120,000 in total can be taken from the relevant plan fund.
Thank you. So it has been discussed in detail by Communities Committee. This is just for allocation of the budget, which is already allowed for, thanks for within our budget. would anyone like to raise any matters concerning this in connection with the budget item rather than the substantive item? So, Joe.
Well, it's sort of.
Okay.
It was just to say I noticed it is citizen housing that we're working in partnership with. Do we have a partnership with Sanctuary or with platform housing of a similar nature?
Through you, Chair, I'm not aware of an approach. This was one where citizen housing approached us for this proposal. So we've not had an approach from these other associations, but we have partnership arrangements with them, and we could happily get into an engagement and a discussion with them on the back of this report.
The only thing I would add, Chair, is that there's a piece of work progressing through the Communities Committee looking at better enabling an affordable housing supply in the city, which starts with a piece of work about the art of the possible and better working with our registered providers. So we are very much looking at all of that again. So at the moment, this has come about as a particular approach, a particular opportunity. But I'm sure in terms of the piece of work that the Communities Committee are overseeing, if that should be more of a model that we pursue with the others, then that's something we will do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just notice in the very last paragraph on it, 7.8, social, environmental and economic implications. It talks about the properties being dispersed across the city. Would the City Council, probably via communities, have any say in the locations of the properties that are being purchased?
Through you, Chair, I think that would depend on the nature of the agreement with Sanctuary, but my citizen rather. But my understanding is it's their projects that they will make the decisions around location. What we get in return for our investment is the nomination rights over those properties. So in the event, for example, we didn't think the property was suitable, then we could potentially not exercise those rights in respect of that. But as far as I understand it, the proposal is theirs and that they will seek the properties and we'll accept their decisions on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know we've got rights for 30 years. What happens at the end of the 30 years? I assume then that the property falls back into the ownership completely without our rights of the housing provider, or is there an option? Do we get 30 years with an option, or?
Through you, Chair, I mean that again would depend on the actual final agreement which is reached with them. So we can take that consideration into those discussions as we finalise the report.
30 years is a pretty good return on your investment for 120 grand. I accept, but if we could get an option, that would be even better. So I knew the legal would come in.
We're a double act tonight. And what I would say is that it's my understanding that 30 years nomination rights as opposed to nomination rights in perpetuity is the starting point for LPs because of their own funding models and the period of time over which they have capitalised that investment. But as you say, it is something that we can look to negotiate with them, I'm sure.
Vote this report and approve this budget. Thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is agenda item 8, proposal for fees and charges on the EV charging points at St Martin's Gate car park.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal which falls to the Policy and Resources Committee as it focuses primarily on setting of fees. And as members are aware, fees and charges are reserved to full council. The normal route for this is through the Income Generation Committee, which has responsibility for reviewing fees and charges. But as that is a subcommittee of the Policy and Resources Committee, in terms of timing, it was felt better to simply bring the report directly to this committee for approval. The proposal is that the fee is set as what has been defined by the consultants who supported the work as a market rate of 25 pence per kilowatt hour. And that fee, if members refer to paragraph 5.1, is sufficient to recover the electricity costs which we expected to incur of 14.2 pence per hour and a proportion of the overall fixed costs. That is dependent upon the level of usage, so it depends upon customers using the sites twice a day for that to be recovered. And we'll have to monitor that as we progress and then obviously seek to change the tariff as appropriate. The second part of the recommendation is around the change to the car park order. We haven't yet brought about that change. There needs to be a consultation period. So the proposal is that while that consultation period takes place, we will put signs in place to indicate that people shouldn't be parking in those areas if they are not electric vehicles, and that the free hour will apply even if it's not yet formal council policy. Just a slight change to the recommendation there. In paragraph 1.2, it says in the last sentence for referral back to the committee, but that should be referral back to the Environment Committee for a decision later this year, as it falls to that committee to make decisions around car parking fee rates. Thank you.
Opening up for questions. Councillor Stafford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my first point is that I'm surprised this hasn't come to Environment Committee, given that it's part of the delivery of the Environmental Sustainability Action Plan, and as you mentioned, parking as a whole also comes under environment, and so it wouldn't be a referral back to the Environment Committee. It would be the first time the Environment Committee would have seen this, and the whole sort of philosophy of how the spaces are used, I think, is an interesting topic, and I think one that would have been worthy of wider debate and discussion at the Environment Committee. And I've certainly raised with officers previously, are these car parking spaces with charging, or are they charging points? And we've not been able to have that debate or discussion. So I want to sort of raise that as a concern. And secondly, the hour free, I think again that I think should be subject to further debate, because obviously you want to provide incentives for spaces to be used and incentives for people to take the leap of purchasing an electric vehicle, especially if they don't have any off-road parking. But it also gives people opportunity to, as long as they plug in, get an hour's parking for free. They could be 99% full. They plug in, they've got an hour for free, which means they're sort of denying the space to potentially other users. So those are the points I want to make, and I think it would be better if it had come through an Environment Committee. I wonder if there is anything we can do to rectify that.
I think, as Shane Flynn has explained, it was through a timing issue. But I think it's a point well made. It is primarily an Environment Committee subject. We are where we are now, though, and so obviously I think we should discuss it here if we want to.
I'll add, sorry, to that there's not even been a discussion with chair or vice chair to that effect. So even despite we had an Environment Committee last week, so timing would have worked, and we've not even been notified that that a different route was being taken. So I don't really
Sounds to
accept
me
that.
like there's been an error to me. But,
Well.
yeah.
Chair, I may note in the comment that this will not go to Environmental Committee. So hopefully that will give the Environmental Committee, although it is 4 months to your next meeting, 2nd of November, will give them an opportunity to debate this, and then it has to come back here, I assume, or to full council for approval.
I wouldn't have thought so. I would have thought it could be discussed by the Environment
Or
Committee.
Environmental Committee can make the decision.
But when will the EV charging points come online? Because we obviously want to have a correct charging
Exactly.
decided. So we do have to make a decision so that we have something for officers to go ahead and do something with on the ground. So when are they expected to come online? It's soon, isn't it? They're physically in place, aren't they? So
So I just this isn't a surprise. You know, this has been a long-term project. It's not an urgent item that's just appeared. It's been long in the planning.
Okay, so would you like us to defer this item and bring it to the next Environment Committee? Because I'm quite happy to do that if you'd like that.
Yeah, I've made my point. I would like to know whether that, I wouldn't want to do it if it had a negative consequence on the usage of the spaces or so on. So I've made my point, but I'd be happy for that if it didn't have any real world impact.
Councillor Stafford, I can only apologise that we find ourselves in this position. I think that looking at this report, what it's trying to do narrowly on the first recommendation is get support from a fees and charges perspective about market tariff. And then the second recommendation talks about consultation on the car parking order coming back to committee. Now, clearly, that should come back to Environment Committee. So the consultation can be done in in consultation with Chair and Vice Chair of the Environment Committee around the terms of that consultation, and then that can come back to Environment Committee. So which would just leave on the table for tonight whether the committee was content with the principle that it would be a market rate tariff that would be applied as opposed to a subsidised tariff. And then that's, if you like, just solely a fees and charges matter, just that.
Yeah, that sounds an excellent way forward.
No, I don't want to help. No. I was just going to observe, really, Chair, that the process for putting an agenda together on the council is roughly sort of 4 to 6 weeks. So I would have thought that the Chair of the Environment Committee and his Vice Chair would have had ample opportunity to input to the process of the agenda planning for this, you know, through the leadership arrangements in the council that now stand. So I'm just a bit surprised maybe it didn't go to CLT or it didn't go to the proper planning process for the agenda or what, I don't know, but it does seem to have been a bit the fundamental self-administered wound, really.
Okay, but let's just accept that this has happened. We've got a reasonable way forward. It's been described by... yes. Yeah. I think we have a reasonable way forward now. Let's go forward on that basis. So would anyone like to discuss the principle of charging for market rate for, as it's described here, 25 pence per kilowatt hour, or whether we should be subsidising it, or whether we should be recovering more money than 25 pence as a market rate?
Chair, I think a market rate is a sensible way to go forward, because there's other places where people can go. If we want to charge too much, they'll go elsewhere. But we also want to attract people, and we do have to recover costs. These cost £440,000, if my memory is correct. So they're not cheap installations. Admittedly, that installation does enable us to fit more, hopefully for less costs in the future. But I think it's a fair price.
No? Are we content? Councillor Lindell.
I mean, I can confirm that what he's talked about is the market rate, being a long-standing electric vehicle owner and having travelled far and wide with it, with more than one model. I mean, no, in parts of Scotland, it is free to charge. That is a policy decision. Whether it's been made at sort of Scottish government level or local government level, I don't know. But to make that sort of decision in order to, for environmental and sustainability reasons, would require identification of a budget. Now, I'm understanding if we do have funding for the sustainability, the environmental sustainability action plan as to whether that's how the council want to use this. I guess this is where we're kind of missing some of the policy conversation, aren't we?
I mean, what the paper actually says is that it will be reviewed in 12 months' time. So maybe this is a proposal which can go ahead for the next 12 months while it's seeing what the demand is and seeing whether we need, if nobody's using these EV charging points, maybe then at that point it makes sense to then look at the pricing to attract more people, perhaps on a promotional basis. Councillor Stanley.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly sensible. I mean, the explanation in a sense is under 4.2, which is that the demand for charging in city centre is not yet established enough to target an income generation approach. So as I think, as you described, Chair, I think, you know, that period to establish exactly what the demand is would be quite a useful way forward. But ultimately, you know, the basic fundamental need to recoup costs just doesn't disappear. You know, we've invested a lot of money in this, and ultimately we need to, you know, recoup that money. So, yeah, exactly as stated in the paper, I think.
It could be that in our budget setting process, taking the point I think Lynn Denham raised, maybe we could create a budget for subsidising, but potentially that's a debate for another day, isn't it? Okay. So we've got two items that we need to agree. The first item is the commercial rate for the charging. Let's get that one out of the way first of all. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, agreed. And the second item is that we change the wording of this next item on the agenda to, in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the Environment Committee, to consider the best way forward for the car parking fees charges. Okay, thank you. All those in favour of that? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Right, so the next item on the agenda is decisions under urgency powers.
Thank you, Chair. This is there is only one specific decision in this respect. We've been using this particular approach throughout the COVID period, in particular to deal with grants which we've received from central government, which we are then to deploy for various reasons. These are relate in particular to business grants, and we have throughout, in order to expedite these, arranged under Managing Director's powers a proposal in consultation with group leaders for how we would deliver the discretionary aspects of this. The latest tranche is for £630,000, which we've received having deployed all of our previous discretionary funding. We have previously, the committee previously has agreed to set aside £100,000 of that for direct support to businesses, which, as paragraph 3.5 states, leaves us with £530,000 to distribute to businesses. We also need to allow for some overspend against the previous discretionary grant. The proposal is that we allocate this funding on the boat to businesses with a particular type of issue, which is that they're continuing to pay premises costs. So the decision was that this would be grants for those businesses which are incurring premises costs and which aren't otherwise eligible under the national mandatory schemes. Now, the grants levels proposed are at 3.7 when we've tried to retain the differential which has been provided for other discretionary grants. Modelling suggests that if we distribute that to those businesses, those small businesses we were already aware of, and we know they haven't changed, then 399,000, just about 400,000 will be distributed, and that will leave a further £100,000 for new applications. In the event that there aren't sufficient new applications, the proposal is that we make a further payment to existing recipients, but we could consider that subsequently as looking at alternative uses for any money that is left over. That's a decision that we could make further along the line. For the moment, the decision is that we will simply devolve that funding. We have to spend all the money by 31st of March 2022. Any money that is not spent will be returned to the government department. So it's incumbent upon us to find some way of devolving that for businesses if we can. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Open to the floor for any questions, queries. Anyone content with that? Councillor Gregson.
In connection with the item, really, Chair, have we got an up-to-date analysis on the state of business in the city through the COVID pandemic, in terms of failing, sustained, growth kind of thing? Is that available at this stage? But I wondered if we've got a list of the businesses, any businesses which have folded, any businesses which have gone into semi-paralysis and then have come out again, and because obviously this is funding which is intended for those businesses which are still viable, but I just wonder what the state of play is in terms of those which are not viable, have become not viable.
Through you, Chair. Well, no, it's not available at the moment, but it's certainly an analysis we could ask for from the revenues teams to give us an indication of the state of play of businesses. As part of this, just to give some assurance to the committee, those where we've paid grants before, we are contacting them and we require a statement from them that they are still viable businesses and that their circumstances haven't changed. So there's still an impact in terms of their income. So that will give us some assurance that we're not paying grants to businesses which are folding or are not viable going forward. But I can, if the committee wishes, request information from the revenues team as to the state of play of businesses across the city. Yeah, I'm providing an analysis.
Any other questions, queries on what you've just heard? No. Okay. Sorry.
Can you hear me anyway? Oh, okay, you can then. Yeah, sorry, apologies everybody for my late arrival. It's just a matter of housekeeping. I probably should declare now that I have been a recipient of a COVID-19 support grant. So that's all it was, obviously, before I was elected. But I just wanted, for sake of clarity for colleagues around the room, just wanted that to be noted for the records. Thank you.
Thank you. That will be noted in the minutes. Thank you. Okay. So on this one, it's just noting. So we'll move on to the next item. Everyone's content. Yep. Thank you. The next item is agenda item 10. And that is the Q1 financial monitoring report. I believe that's Mark Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. This is the financial report for the first quarter of the current year. The forecast for the year end as it stands is a deficit of £439,000, and this would be covered by a transfer from the risk reserve to ensure that the outturn at the end of the year would achieve the council's balanced budget. If I refer you to paragraph 3.7, the overall picture here is that the lockdown from the pandemic has continued into the first quarter of the year, which has resulted in the council's income streams continuing to be below the budgets, and at the same time further increases in expenditure. So looking at the table, at the top you can see the general adverse variances, particularly housing benefit subsidy, which we can come back to in a minute, and then income streams from bereavement services and leisure services both being below the budgets. A notable absentee there is car parking income. As you'll be aware, this is the council's single biggest income stream. But as part of the budget setting process, we were mindful that that would be difficult at the start of the year to achieve the income levels we have previously, and therefore a contingency was built into the budget to cover that. In the event that contingency has proved quite accurate, and at the moment the forecast for the income there is to achieve the budget net of that contingency. There are then a number of smaller overspends, for example, the advertising and sponsorship income and trade waste, where the the effects of the lockdown have continued to affect the income levels. Towards the bottom, there are then the favourable variances, particularly on interest payable, where the council's borrowing position continues to be quite favourable due to the funding received from central government, meaning that the borrowing that had been budgeted for this year is unlikely to be necessary, and therefore there will be a saving in interest costs. Similarly, on salaries, there have been a number of vacant posts that haven't been filled during the year so far. And then those bottom two lines that the government have granted further grants in terms of the impacts of the pandemic, and particularly the 364,000, which was the extension of the government's 75% compensation scheme for lost income, which obviously helps offset the lines towards the top. Just returning to the housing benefit subsidy, clearly the single largest variance here. If I refer you to the paragraph just above 3.6, you can see a table there that summarises the net cost of housing benefit subsidy over the last 4 years. This shows that the adverse variance we're forecasting doesn't come as a surprise. It's actually an improvement on last year, which was significantly impacted by the pandemic, albeit it's still higher than in 1920. There's two main underlying reasons here. The cost of temporary accommodation that the council uses continues to exceed the housing benefit subsidy that we receive from the government. And also in previous years, we've had a strong recovery of overpayments made to claimants. As claimants transfer onto universal credit, which means they receive the housing benefit gross, and the council is unable to deduct directly those overpayments, meaning that we rely on the claimant paying them back specifically. Clearly, in times of hardship, such as we've had over the last 12 months, it's more difficult for claimants to make those payments, and the debt that the council has in this respect hasn't fallen by as much as we might have hoped. And therefore, that contributes to that 475k adverse variance. The only other area I'd draw members' attention to is towards the end of the report in terms of council tax and business rates. So paragraph 8. The two tables in 8.1 show the payments so far in respect to council tax and business rates. And as far as council tax is concerned, the payment continues to be quite strong and is actually achieving the target based on the last 3 years. Business rates, however, is quite a different picture, where at the moment it's well behind that average. However, as the paragraph underneath that explains, this is quite a complicated picture, and the 21.7% is, shall we say, not necessarily representative of the true underlying picture. For the first quarter, a number of businesses in the hospitality and retail sector were entitled to 100% relief, which means they received a bill for 100% relief, nothing payable, and therefore haven't made any payments in that first quarter. From July, that relief reduces to 66% for the remaining 9 months, and they've therefore received a new bill for the lower amount. The payment statistic assumes that revised bill is payable over the full 12 months, and effectively assumes that they would have been making payments in the first quarter, which of course they didn't, because they thought they got 100% relief. Our expectation would be that providing those businesses are still trading, they will then make the payments during the year, which will gradually see us, which will catch up. Over and above that will have been other businesses, of course, who, for whatever reason, in terms of their trading and as we come out of the pandemic, will have been deferring their payments, knowing that they can still make them during the year. I hope that explanation makes sense, and therefore happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. So I've got a question first of all. You mentioned in your report that housing benefit, there was a 1% assumption, and it's an estimate. It could be more, it could be less. I'm just wondering, that 1% is presumably based on historical experience of what we've had in the past. I was wondering whether in the current economic climate, whether you might expect that to be worse or better. Potentially it could be worse. What is your view on that?
Yes, thank you. Just to clarify the 1%, the value of the payments made by the council under housing benefit subsidy total nearly £30 million compared to the council's underlying budget of its own expenses of just over 20 million. So it's clearly a figure that's significant in terms of the council's accounts. Hence our variance of 475,000 is only just over 1% of that £30 million budget. In terms of where that variance is likely to go, that is a really difficult area to forecast. And obviously, as part of coming to that 475,000, we've had to do that. And that's based on the trends that we've seen over the last few months, an improvement over this time last year, and particularly in terms of the temporary accommodation costs. But as I say, the recovery of the overpayments is probably going in the other direction. So hence it's our best estimate, but that could easily fluctuate by 100,000 or 200,000 either side, depending on the conditions going forward.
Thank you. Open the floor for any other questions. Councillor Denham.
Yeah, sorry, to kind of follow on the housing benefit one, because I must say I struggle to understand it. And I have had an explanation before from a housing perspective, and still struggle to understand it. But with regard to paragraph 4.8, so the significance of individuals going on to universal credit, what's the implications for us as an organisation then? Just that they've got less money to make to repay their overpayment, or is there some other process thing that moves it about?
Thank you. The significance of the transfer to universal credit is that the individual then receives their benefit gross, and it's then up to them to determine how to best apply that, including repaying the council for any previous overpayments that they've received. Prior to the transfer to universal credit, the council had the opportunity to deduct any overpayments before they paid the individual. So the implications for the council is that we currently have a £2 million debtor of previous overpayments, which we would expect to recover from those individuals going forward, and historically have done. And the pattern of this tends to be that individuals may be making small payments over a long period of time, in some cases several years. I guess you can appreciate that if somebody's on a fairly low level of income, then making those sort of payments back can be quite difficult. The risk to the council is that we won't recover all of that debt. Hence, the accounts include a provision against it for approximately 50% of it, £1 million. Nevertheless, that still leaves us a net debt of £1 million that the council has to recover. There's no reason to think at the moment that won't be the case. Yes, it does represent a risk.
So in kind of structural or strategic terms, as obviously there's been more people going on to universal credit because of the pandemic and because of losing jobs and so on, but the structure of the benefit system is intended to move more people onto universal credit rather than other benefits. So it is something that as an organisation is going to have a longer term sort of systemic issue. Would that be correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, it would. Yeah, the part of the issue for us is that we had control, much greater control over the housing benefits subsidy process than we have now, and therefore there is less that we can do in order to address that underlying problem. The other dimension to this is if just examining the historic records, there are elements of this bed and breakfast spending, for example, which we can reclaim and we get back from government, and elements that we can't. Well, 10 years or so ago, then the amount that we could claim was 7 times the amount that we can't. And now it's the opposite way around. We get twice as much that we can't claim than we could because of the extent to which those costs have been rising over time and have exceeded what government allowance is. So it's an ongoing trend, and yes, we have less and less control over it because of universal credit. All we can really do is continue to work with local landlords to ensure that the amount of rents that they are charging is in line with what government sets as a reasonable charge through the local housing allowance, and also that we continue our policy of trying to generate or own temporary accommodation of our own, which we can therefore control the price of. And then more that we can move away from bed and breakfast accommodation, the better in the longer term.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor Carver.
Okay,
Yes.
right, okay.
There you are.
Thanks very much. Sorry about that. Okay, I must have logged myself out without realising. Yeah, it's really sort of just pick it. I know this has been an issue with successive governments with the problems faced with regards to changing housing benefit rules and universal credit. It's really just an interest point. Has anybody lobbied government for a change in the rules? Because obviously it strikes me this won't just be a matter that affects local authorities, it will affect private landlords and housing associations as well. So has anyone fed this feedback back from, obviously one of the interest groups for local government? Because surely the answer would be to see if we can. It takes a lot less financial pressure on local authorities, on private landlords, and indeed on tenants where they find themselves in a financial situation where they're because of the circumstances at the moment, they've spent money that they shouldn't have really had access to spend, and thus getting themselves in a difficult situation.
Thank you for that. Obviously, obviously that isn't an agenda item that we're discussing now tonight. It's a good point, and I'm sure you get a lot of support from many people saying the rules should be changed. There are a lot of landlords who do good work. There are some who are obviously creaming in the money. Thank you. Right. Any other points that would like to raise? Councillor McKay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just concentrating on the possible good news for a bit. At paragraph 8.1, talks about it's also encouraging that in recent weeks, a large number of businesses have asked for direct debits to be restarted. A couple of things on that. This report obviously was written a little while ago because it does say that they will take effect in July. So a couple of things. Were those direct debits at full rate, or were they negotiated rates because of problems? And secondly, do you see, and I appreciate we're going into another quarter now, but have you seen that continuing through the month of July?
Through you, Chair, certainly the original direct debit position was in respect of full rates, so it was, there may have been individual negotiated repayment arrangements, as there always are, but the issue was that quite simply, you know, a significant number of businesses simply moved away from the direct debits, and so that they could then manage their cash flow better during the COVID period. And of course, we were happy to accept that. And in the end, the outturn for last year was not as significant as we thought it would be certain times during the year. So that position improved considerably. As to whether it's improved again in July, I think there have been positive messages, but we need to see the figures really before we see whether or not it's made a real difference. It sounds okay, but you know, I'll give you more details when we get the latest figures from Civica.
Thank you. Any other points, questions? No. I think we've got, this is for a noting, but we also have to approve the write-off of council tax, don't know as well. Yeah. So hopefully we're happy to note the first part of the report. And the next item is about approving the write-off of council tax. So all those in favour?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're now on to the last agenda item, which is the Q1 performance report. Let's have to Shane again.
Thank you, Chair. This is our regular first report of the year, and we are very close to the end of the first quarter, so there's been a great deal of time to analyse. There are nonetheless detailed comments against each of the indicators, so I won't go through them all. In terms of a summary, we've made progress against achieving excellence, our internal projects, or reset the timelines for those, which is why a number of them are green, because we've understood that we need to push back some of that timing for a year. In respect to the city plan ones, there's one red one there, which members will be aware that the county council had a decision at planning committee and have postponed that decision pending further information. So that has pushed that back a little bit. In terms of the indicators, we've already discussed the net spend position on another item on the agenda. And just pick up on those two in relation to housing benefit claims and council tax support claims. Members will be aware that we've been trying for a while now to make it more explicit that the time taken to process new claims is the thing that's most important to us. And we've agreed with Civica that we will reflect those indicators. They don't form part of the service level agreement with them, so there's no contractual issues there, but it does highlight the fact that performance is considerably behind where we would want it to be. So we will be continuing to have discussions with them about how we can make sure that when people put in a claim, they get a process very quickly, move to a position when they're able to get the support that they need. Now, those are the primary areas, but if any members have any further questions, then we're happy to try and answer them.
Okay, I'll start off with a question from myself. I've got a question about the city centre transport strategy. According to the report, the original due date was March 2019. The new due date is March 2022. It's obviously 3 years past its due date. And even the due date which was set, I believe, was quite a long time, but anyway. I'm just wondering, in order that we don't go into the same position that we've been up to now, where it's just slipped, I do accept that COVID has taken at least a year out of the programme. I wonder whether the committee would agree that what we ought to have is, rather than waiting until March 2022 and find that there may be another delay, that we ask for perhaps an interim report or some sort of progress update on this, so that we've not just left waiting and hoping that it will happen, that we have some, perhaps a quarterly or 6-monthly intervals, so that we have some sight of progress of what's going on, and then some interim findings. I don't know if other people would support me in that or support. I think it's something we all want on a cross-party basis. So is that something you have to take away, Shane?
Certainly, Chair, if that's minuted, then we'll be happy to bring a report if required.
Yeah, Chair, I mean, I'd certainly support that. And I mean, you were saying either quarterly or 6 monthly. I mean, if it was September, that would be 6 months before the March 22 deadline, isn't it? And also it would coincide with the next meeting of this committee. So maybe it would be, rather than having those two small paragraphs, having something more substantial would be useful.
Good point. Thank you. Let's aim for September for a report, an interim report. Yeah. Did you want to raise another question, Adrian? Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wanting to go on to the next one, the Keepax Bridge. Never understood why it's called Keepax, actually. Why is it not called the Gelleville Bridge? Is it, you know, I don't know. Well, it's more interesting to go from one side to the other. Anyway, the point is, though, that as a result of the deferral by the county planning, do we know, I've not seen any detail of what the grounds for that deferral were, what was going then had to go and be looked at by county planners in order to bring that back to the county planning committee. And I wondered if we could have that detail and how that impacts on the towns fund proposals, because there's a deliberate timeline to the towns fund, which needs to be in by the 10th of September as identified here. So what is, can we have some more information about the direct impact that that is going to have on those plans? Because clearly we are going to have to make a decision about the towns fund because we didn't get sufficient money. And if this is a project which the county is not going to support through its planning process, then we should consider what we're going to do with that money in another way for the towns fund.
Through you, Chair. Well, there is a submission that will be coming to the committee at its September meeting, and therefore that will have to detail those implications of any decisions that the county has made. But there is, for information, more information on the county council's website as to why it was deferred and what the decision was. So we have that information. I would say, though, that the submission that we have to make in September is still very much an outline position with regard to agreeing the revised funding. And we then need to make the detailed business cases, which will follow on beyond that. So it's during the process of making those detailed business cases when we need to understand completely the financial implications of the decisions that the county council is making. So there is quite a long process to go through yet. I don't think that the decision at that stage should be any problem in terms of putting the outline cases back to MHCOG on the 10th of September, but obviously the committee will want reassurances around that, which we'll bring to that meeting.
Okay, I've got another question that is on the redevelopment of the Santon Walk swimming pool site. When you look at the report and the text that's in there, a lot of this is looking back at what's happened over the last few weeks and months, I guess. Doesn't really look forward to what is happening next and have any sort of plan of what's going to happen. And I'm just wondering whether it's possible to say something about what are the next steps for the Santon Walk site in terms of working with our chosen partner. And maybe we can have a verbal update on that, but maybe at the next committee meeting when we look at this, we have a more forward-looking of what's coming up. Sian, can you explain a little bit more what's happening with?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we'd be happy to bring an update in a bit more granularity. Just to confirm, the current position is that we are now in contract with Sanctuary for the housing stage. In relation to the demolition stage, work is progressing well, as are party wall negotiations. The demolition involves an awful lot of large-scale work. You'll have seen the media coverage about the chimney coming down, for example, and small-scale work, including brick-by-brick hand demolition. But it's a whole programme of work that takes us until the end of the year and slightly beyond. And the next stage, having got into contract with Sanctuary, there are obviously some work streams now that can really pick up pace. So from Sanctuary's perspective, it's the pre-application discussions and the planning application. Now they have that confidence to continue those discussions now that the contract is in place with their funding behind it. But separately, from our point of view, is agreeing with our appointed demolition and remediation contractor and with Sanctuary the remediation strategy in detail and the final costings all around that. So yes, we can certainly bring something more detail if the committee wish, but it's still full steam ahead on the project.
Thank you. I've got some more questions, but Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. It's in relation to the equalities and diversity strategy. I'm almost positive my memory is correct. At one of these meetings a few months ago, groups were asked to put nominations forward for members to be involved, and to date I've not seen or heard of anything. And I know it says there's going to be member workshops, but that wasn't what these members were going to be involved in. Is what's happening there? If that, getting an update on that.
Through you, Chair. Yes, the member engagement sessions still need to happen, Councillor Mitchell, and we are a little bit behind. There's been, I think, 6 workshops with council officers and managers going through the Local Government Association's framework in detail. Out of that is some clear themes and areas of good practice and areas for improvement. So my proposal was to bring those to the member appointed group to show you what we've learnt so far. And also within the LGA framework, there are 1 or 2 of the measures which really speak to the member body, perhaps more than others, about community representation and whether you think we're doing enough and what else we can do. So we've saved some work on that, and it's really incumbent on me to get those dates in the diary.
Thank you. Councillor Riaz.
On a similar vein, Chair, I remember a motion at Council a number of months ago which sought to appoint a young people's champion. Yet to date, we haven't appointed a young people's champion, and I wonder what was the status with that also.
Yes, that's something we need to bring to group leaders, because it's something that we think that the Policy and Resources Committee can do. But obviously, in terms of our usual protocols, we would have a discussion with group leaders first to see if that there can be a consensus on the way forward, or we will do it as we do appointments to outside bodies and bring a report, and then there can be votes. But we can certainly bring that to the September committee.
Councillor Denham.
Thank you. I just kind of wanted to reiterate the concern about the performance on the housing benefit and council tax benefit claim. Sorry, I haven't got the report in front of me. I mean, particularly when you think that people going on to universal credit have to wait a month before they get payments, and for these you're then looking at another month with present performance, or 6 weeks before money comes through. That is a really very significant strain on households who by definition are struggling with income, and the reality is it's potentially pushing families into debt, pushing families to the food bank. So there are very serious consequences as a result of that performance. So anything that can be done to improve it would make a very significant difference to lives of families in Worcester.
Thank you, Lynn. I support you on that. I think it's you say they are the most vulnerable people who are probably the least able to complain about their plight, and I think it's really important that we do act on this. I'm going to ask Shane to comment on this and to ask really what could be done and what can we do to try to put a little bit of pressure on I think the Civica who are administering this, to try to, because this isn't something that's just popped up. This has been like this for a long time, possibly getting worse. This isn't happened in the last few weeks or months. This has been the last 1 year or 2. And we keep on hearing that they're going to improve, but we haven't actually seen it yet. And I really would like to impress on you the urgency of trying to see some sort of corrective action plan from the supplier.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, well, we do have a monthly meeting with Civica in which we go through these issues and impress upon them the fact that we are seriously concerned about this. And they are aware, perfectly aware that, this contract has a limited time and we want to see good performance on the contract when it comes to renewing it. So that's a matter of consideration. There's some assurance around the council tax support because again, we have control over that and we are not currently in a position where we're actively pursuing debt to the same extent as we normally would do. So in the event that people find themselves in a position where they can't pay their council tax, they won't face the same rigorous process in terms of recovery. And Civica, as has been pointed out in the commentary there, the amount of the caseload continues to increase. So even though we have the COVID situation has eased somewhat, we are still in a position of very high volumes for council tax. And we are talking with them very regularly about ways they can improve processes. One of the steps which we have just agreed with them last week is to change the system which is used to the fundamental system, which will evolve from the capita system, which we use at the moment, to Civica's own system, which means that they'll be able to streamline a lot of processes through that. So in respect of housing benefits, that should help as well. But yeah, I take the committee's point, and I'm happy to go back to Civica and impress upon them the need to improve performance.
Could we further ask you that? Sorry, could we further ask you that we have a corrective action plan, perhaps in September?
Certainly, I'll request that.
Thank you. Councillor Mitchell.
Understanding or not, I'm in support that people who need the benefits should get them as soon as possible, and I'm fully on support of that. Shane, just for my education, if people are going on to universal credit, need housing benefit, there is an opportunity to take an advance loan straight away, if I'm correct, to cover that gap while they're waiting for the official benefit to come. And I understand that is taking on debt, but to be repaid at a very small rate. So there is some mitigation. I'm not saying improvement doesn't need to happen, but just so we get the whole picture, there is some mitigation in place, isn't there? If I'm correct.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I've only got one more quite small question left. In the report, there's a section on policy framework review. And I'm going to have to be very honest, I don't really know what that is. Can you explain that in sort of plain English, what that policy framework review is?
Sorry, Chair, did you say policy, the policy framework review, not equality? Yes.
Policy framework.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the policy framework review, every year when we are looking at the priorities for the year ahead, we have our city plan priorities and we have our business excellence priorities. And some of those are about the less glamorous environment of keeping our house in order. And this one is squarely one of those. So the policy framework review is making sure that, for example, sitting behind a refreshed city plan is an up-to-date and relevant set of operational and service level plans. So it isn't a whole-scale review of things. We've got some key overarching strategies, such as the environment strategy, the SWDP. But below that, there are a number of, if you like, management level plans as well that guide the service delivery in all aspects of the business. And some of those need review, they're out of date. And we have an old set on the back of the city plan, some of which we still use and some of which we don't. And linked to that, we want a really clear visual that explains for officers how it all fits together to navigate some of it. So there's a little bit of work to do around that. And also perhaps of more interest to members, a review of the Constitution, simply because we've been operating with these arrangements for a number of years now. We make our consequential amendments as we go along, but in a number of instances, for example, the scheme of delegation, we need to catch up with some of the changes that we've been making. And it will obviously emphatically be a matter for members how far we take that, whether we just literally just adjust names and update things, or whether there's anything else on the Constitution that you wish us to look at. And that will be a process of dialogue through full council. So there's some of that is very much back office, and some of it is a bit more perhaps of interest to members.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. One more. We tend to come to these meetings and they always tend to be a bit negative, and we kick officers, and I'm sure they go home with bruises. But I'd like to say congratulations. I normally go straight to the Reds, but what did jump out at me was the levels of engagement, staff survey engagement, and we're way over the 600 now. And that must have been more difficult with people working from home, etc. So there's obviously some congratulations to members of the team, particularly the leadership as well, I guess. So that's really good to see. So well done, good news.
Yeah. Any other points? Questions, concerns? No? Fine, okay. This is just for noting, I believe, so that's the last agenda item. Are there any other points of any other business? No? Okay, thank you very much. The meeting closed. Thank you.